Elden Ring. Is it the best Souls game? Probably. Are there many cool and unique enemies to fight? Most definitely. Are they all created equal? But most importantly, would your D&D game be better with them in it? Sure, I think so. So keep watching and I'll show you 5 stat blocks that I've created for some of the various ne'er-do-wells of this amazing video game that takes at least 55 minutes to complete, or maybe 19 if you have sociopathic tendencies and early onset agoraphobia. So the name of our game is Dungeons & Dragons, and From Software just so happens to have those aforementioned sociopaths working for them, because there are like 50 dragons in this game, and they even have their own county and zip code. So the first enemy that I'll be converting into a D&D stat block is a dragon, and I'll be converting specifically the Glintstone Dragon. So if we take a look at the stat block, we can see that it is an adult Glintstone Dragon. It is adult and not ancient, and that's mainly because I want this stat block to actually get used, and I could probably count on my fingers how many D&D groups have gone past level 10, so hopefully it being an adult dragon will be a happy middle ground. Going through the dragon's statistics, the most notable difference from other dragons is that its highest stat is intelligence, and it has fire resistance and force immunity. In my mind, the blue flame that the dragons in Elden Ring breathe are basically magic fire or glint fire. So this breath weapon will be part fire and part force. Looking at the features, Bolstered Arcana gives the dragon a 60-foot radius aura that empowers spells and glint sorceries to deal max dice rolls. This benefits the dragon, but also anyone within 60 feet of the dragon. The effect can be, however, dispelled, blocked, and/or temporarily counterspelled. Glint points are points that the dragon can gain through various ways that we'll get to, and it can use these glint points to make sorceries stronger, but it can also use 3 points to quicken a spell from its innate spellcasting list. Glint warding is just legendary resistance, but it's actually fun because the dragon must sacrifice some glint points to do it. Sorcerous Fury allows the dragon's force damage to ignore force resistance and deal half damage to force immune targets. Spell Reflection means that when the dragon is targeted by a spell, the caster will need to make an ability check, and if the caster fails, the spell has no effect. If the caster fails by too much, the spell is reflected back at the caster. If this check is failed, the dragon also gains some glint points. And the final feature the dragon has is innate spellcasting, allowing it to cast some very useful spells. Moving to actions, it has a multi-attack of a Carrion Glint Piercer and 2 Glint Blade Slashes. The Carrion Glint Piercer is a 30-foot line attack that the dragon can spend glint points to redirect the line when it reaches its end. So this line attack could actually be a 60-foot line and have a turn in it halfway through. The Glint Blade Slash is a 15-foot reach melee attack. Notably, these glint attacks are using the dragon's intelligence as the attack modifier, meaning his claws have a lower plus to hit. The dragon's breath weapon is Glint Breath. Unlike other breath weapons, this one does a bit less damage, only dealing 8d6 damage total split between fire and force. However, anyone damaged by the breath weapon loses 1 unused spell slot of their highest level if they have one, and the dragon gains glint points equal to the spell's level. This attack is seriously devastating to spellcasters, and this dragon in general clearly excels against fighting spell-wielding enemies. For bonus actions, it has Frightful Presence, which you might be used to seeing as part of a dragon's multi-attack, but I moved it here and made it once per day. And then of course, as I mentioned, the dragon can use a bonus action to quicken a spell using glint points. For legendary actions, it can make a Glint Blade Slash. It can do a Crystal Burst, which costs 2 legendary actions and is essentially a better magic missile, but it can also spend glint points to add missiles to the attack. It can also do a Glint Blade Phalanx for 2 legendary actions, which is just like the spell in Elden Ring and creates magic floating swords above the dragon. These swords will attack creatures one by one if the dragon is hit by an attack. But while the swords are there, they also give an armor class bump to the dragon for each active sword. The dragon can also spend glint points to add additional swords when they are created. So that is the Glintstone Dragon. A nasty dragon when it comes to fighting spellcasters, and to be honest, I would probably treat this stat block as if it's an ancient dragon if your party is mostly spellcasters, because martial characters are not going to have nearly as hard of a time fighting this as caster classes will. Alright, so next up we have a stat block that's a bit weaker. Or maybe not, I suppose, that probably depends on who you ask, since our next monster is the Mimic tier. So the stats here are nothing to write home about. The Mimic tier is an ooze with very similar stats to other oozes. What we really care about here is its action that it can do once per day called Mimic. This action allows the Mimic tier to change itself into a copy of a large or smaller creature that it can see, and it gains that creature's gear, stats, abilities, items, personality, and even their memories from the past 10 days. And like a wild shape, if it is reduced to 0 hit points, it reverts to its normal form. And I mean, that's it. I mean, that's the stat block. I'd like to say this is the most balanced stat block I've ever made, but not against an entire party. Like in Elden Ring, this monster would be fun in a 1 versus 1 combat against a player, or you could simply just fill a room with as many Mimic tiers as there are players in your party. Moving from the Mimic tier, our third stat block is the Thorn Sorcerer. Other than fire resistance, there isn't anything crazy in the stats, but looking at the features, our first feature is Hemorrhage. The Thorn Sorcerer applies hemorrhage points to its enemies with its attacks, and this feature states that at the start of their turns, creatures with hemorrhage points need to make a Constitution saving throw. If they fail, they must roll 2 of their hit dice and take that much necrotic damage. If they succeed instead, their hemorrhage points go down by 2. Also notably, creatures with hemorrhage points have disadvantage on death saving throws. The other feature is Death Lash. Basically, if the Thorn Sorcerer's own Briars of Sin attack reduces it to 0 hit points, it can lash out at a nearby creature, and if it hits, the creature has to make a hemorrhage save. If the creature fails, the Thorn Sorcerer gains 1 hit point instead of dying. For actions, the Sorcerer has a multi-attack of either 2 Briars of Punishment or 3 Briars of Sin. The Briars of Punishment is a ranged attack that deals some necrotic damage, gives 2 hemorrhage points, and can also potentially restrain the target. The Briars of Sin attack is a very unique attack. It is a 10-foot radius attack centered on the Sorcerer. It deals some necrotic damage and deals some hemorrhage points, but a successful saving throw can reduce the damage and the hemorrhage points. The attack also deals damage to the Thorn Sorcerer. However, what's really special is the damage, the hemorrhage points, and the radius of the spell all get doubled for each consecutive Briars of Sin attack that the Sorcerer makes in 1 turn. This means that if the Sorcerer uses its 3 Briars of Sin attacks, the radius on the first will go from 10 to then a radius of 20 feet on the second, and a radius of 40 feet on the third. Plus the damage and the hemorrhage points will do the same. Of course, this also includes the damage that the Sorcerer does to itself, which is why the Death Lash feature will be quite important, since 3 Briars of Sins in a row will cause the Sorcerer to, on average, deal 35 damage to itself. The Thorn Sorcerer also has a melee weapon attack, and a reaction that allows it to heal from another creature's hemorrhaging. Overall, this creature is a very cool glass cannon type of monster, and in my mind it would fit quite well into some sort of a cultist type faction, or alongside other blood magic themed characters like blood hunters or vampires. Alright, so next up for our second to last stat block, we have an enemy that has a strong connection to what will be our final stat block. This is the Cleanrot Knight. Looking at the Cleanrot Knight's stats, it has necrotic and poison damage resistance, as well as exhaustion and poisoned immunity. In the features, it has Aura of Rot, which sends out a 30-foot radius around it that can infect creatures with Scarlet Rot, and can distribute some of the damage the Cleanrot Knight would take to other creatures in the aura instead. It also has the Scarlet Rot feature. This feature explains that creatures with Scarlet Rot take some necrotic damage on their turns, which also reduces their maximum HP. Additionally, however, something very unique to Scarlet Rot is that any movement speed a creature has that it does not use on its turn is lost. The example being that if a creature had a 30-foot walking speed and a 40-foot flying speed, and then it walked 20 feet and flew 10 feet on its turn, it would now only have a 20-foot walking speed and a 10-foot flying speed for its next turn. So if you have Scarlet Rot, your movement essentially becomes a use it or lose it type of scenario. Now, this might seem strange and not how it works in Elden Ring, but I wanted to set Scarlet Rot apart from other conditions in D&D, and the way it works in Elden Ring is basically just stronger poison damage. So instead, I watched a couple VatiVidya videos and did my lore research and found that Scarlet Rot from a lore perspective is stagnation, and that a warrior who killed some Scarlet Rot god was being guided by a water spirit, and that warrior would go on to teach Malenia how to do her waterfowl dance. So the reason you lose movement here if you don't use it is because that's what Scarlet Rot wants. It is stagnation. Anyways, looking at the final feature, Law of Causality, this is a conversion of an incantation in Elden Ring, and I gave it to the Cleanrot Knight because the Cleanrot Knight already does have some holy attacks. For actions, it has a Halo Scythe melee weapon attack that can apply Scarlet Rot. It also has a Ring of Light, which is a ranged attack, but notably it ignores 3/4 cover, and if it misses, it will return for a second attack at the start of the target creature's next turn. And the Knight also has a recharge attack called Sacred Phalanx, which is the same as the line attack it can do in the game. And lastly, the Knight has a Shove reaction, which it can take if a creature misses it with a melee attack. So that was the Cleanrot Knight, but like I said, it has a connection to our final stat block here, and I'm sure that you already know what that is. So let's move on to the final stat block. Malenia, Blade of Mikola. Malenia has a 21 armor class, 315 hit points, and a 60-foot walking speed. She has poison resistance and necrotic immunity, and is immune to the charmed, exhausted, paralyzed, poisoned, restrained, and stunned conditions. For her features, she has flowing movement. This basically gives her an always active freedom of movement spell. She also has the Goddess of Rot feature, which states that if a creature is hit by one of her melee attacks, it could be infected by Scarlet Rot. But even more than that, Malenia heals for half of all necrotic damage that she deals. She has the Rot Harvest feature, which is basically legendary resistance, but she has to cleanse any nearby creatures of Scarlet Rot in order to use it. She has the Scarlet Rot feature, which is the same as on the Cleanrot Knight, except the save DC is much higher. And she has the Scarlet Aeonia feature once per day. This feature is emulating her second phase like in Elden Ring. She regains 30 hit points for each creature within 500 feet that has Scarlet Rot. She gets her Waterfowl Dance usages back. She gains a flying speed, and gains access to a couple new attacks. Also, this ability does release a 60-foot radius AoE of Scarlet Rot. For Malenia's attacks, she has a multi-attack of 4 attacks, with 2 slashes, 1 kick, and a thrust. Her slash attack is unique in that while it is a single target melee attack, any creatures within 5 feet other than the target of the attack need to make a dexterity saving throw or also take the damage from the attack. Her kick is a normal melee attack that can also stun the target, and her thrust attack has a 15-foot reach. Next is her signature ability, Waterfowl Dance. This is the attack that Malenia is most well known for. Here she can do it twice per day, but does get it back in her second phase. Now what this attack does is she makes 4 attacks with her slash attack, and can then also move up to her movement as part of the attack. Now this might not seem like much, but it also states that she gains access to the Waterfowl Dance legendary action until the start of her next turn. The Waterfowl Dance legendary action allows Malenia to continue her dance and make 4 more slash attacks and move up to her movement, and it only costs her 1 legendary action. So what does this mean? It means that if she uses this action, over the course of a round, if she uses all of her legendary actions to do the same, she will have made 16 5-foot AoE melee attacks for an average of 224 damage, and she will have healed from all of those attacks, plus she will have gotten potentially an extra 240 feet of movement. So yeah, this is her Waterfowl Dance. And I think the fact that it's spread over the course of an entire round is even more fun than it happening all at once. Moving from there though, she does have a bonus action that is granted to her during her second phase, which is an AoE attack, but also an AoE heal for her because it deals necrotic damage. She has a reaction called Pierce that is basically a sentinel attack if someone leaves Malenia's 15-foot reach on her thrust attack. Importantly though, if a creature gets hit by this and has Scarlet Rot, their movement is now going to be whatever they used before Malenia hit them with this reaction, due to the use it or lose it type of movement restriction that Scarlet Rot has. For her legendary actions, of course, she has her Waterfowl Dance continuation, but she also has Disengage, and she has Impale, which lets her move and try to grapple a creature. If she does, she throws them into the air and does a thrust attack, which auto crits if it hits. And finally, she has the Phantom Spirit legendary action in her second phase, which sends ghosts of herself out to make 1 slash attack each, against 1 or 2 targets. All in all, this stat block I think gets across the feeling of what the Malenia fight is like in Elden Ring, which is basically a tornado of attacks followed by an insane amount of sharp and sudden movements. Plus, I feel that this, more so than any of my other high-level stat blocks, is one that can be easily balanced up or down to fit your party. None of what she can do is particularly manipulative, it's all just attacks and movement. So some HP and damage reduction would be all it would require to fit this for a low-level party. Anyways, those were the 5 Elden Ring stat blocks for the video. Leave a like and a comment of which other Elden Ring creatures you would like to see. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the lands between.